My name is Brian Anderson. I'm an assistant professor of entrepreneurship at the Block School of Management at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. What motivated the research was a question about firm age and the assumption that younger firms benefit more from behaving entrepreneurially than older firms do. But it happens within a context. And so the impetus behind the paper were, what are the configurational factors between age and intangible resources that really allow younger firms to get the most bang for their buck when it comes to employing their entrepreneurial strategies. What we found in this paper, using a sample of small businesses in Japan, that younger firms that possessed certain intangible resources, things like having a strong initial brand identity and some initial intellectual property, had a much higher probability of performing better than younger firms that didn't have those same resources. But what was more interesting is that the effect really became strongest for young firms and young firms only. So older firms that still possess these strong intangible resources didn't get nearly the same advantage that younger firms did. Intangible resources are those things that firms possess, particularly in the knowledge economy, that are difficult to quantify, they're difficult to monetize, but they clearly represent sources of competitive advantage. So brand can certainly be one of those things. Intellectual property can be one of those things. Reputation can be one of those things. It's one of those topics that for younger firms that are trying to deal with liabilities of newness, they don't have the reputation, they don't have the physical assets or the monetary assets that older firms have, but they can possess and build very quickly reputational and intellectual property assets that allow them to compete. So one of the challenges with this paper was the methodology that we used. And if we were to go back and do it again, we would take a much more rigorous approach. Japanese firms have a very different conceptualization of age than, say, a firm in the United States or a firm in Western Europe. So, for example, our younger firms in Japan were some of which were still over 100 years old. And it's the notion that age in the Japanese context is very, very different. Sometimes we'll find firms in Japan that are 400 to 500 years old. Now, they're obviously doing very different things than they did 500 years ago, but as an entity, as an organization, they can trace their lineage back generations, hundreds of years, centuries. One of the challenges with interpreting that paper is really making sense of what firm age is in a context-specific way. I would very much love to do this same study again, except this time we would use a multi-country design where we could really tease out the differences in how those business societies think about age. So when we think about the implications of the paper, not surprisingly, having reputational assets, having intellectual property gives you a competitive advantage. What I think does provide some context is when you have a young firm and they've got a choice between investing in physical assets, investing in tangible resources versus investing in intangible resources, intellectual property, reputation. For younger firms, at least this initial study would seem to suggest that you get far more bang for your buck in investing in intangible resources than you get in investing in tangible resources, at least in Japan.